Hello, and welcome to Leadership as a Philosophy, Not a Checklist. In today's episode, we're going to call the call center Calamity. So I have in the town that I'm in, there's a call center that's basically been around for a long time, and it's got a terrible reputation. Turnover is ridiculous, and everybody that goes to work there is just going because it's good money, and they hope they can hang on long enough to get their bills paid for or whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. So before we start, remember, if you're new here and this is your first time, go look at this video because this talks about the archetypal leadership model, and this is how we're going to evaluate or talk about these situations. So I was talking to a guy that works at this call center, and he was telling me that he's looking for another job. I said, well, what happened? He says, well, here's the way it was working. So the requirement was you had to have an average during the day. Your average call time couldn't be longer than 10 minutes. So you could have a couple over, you could have a couple under. And you were supposed to take, I think it was 40 calls a day. I don't know how that math works out. I think that's about right. With breaks and lunch and everything, you're supposed to take 40 calls a day, average time of 10 minutes. Well, for 8 months, he had this amazing reputation. So his call volume was about, I think he was getting 42 or 43 calls a day, and he had a 100% satisfaction rating from the customers. Sounds like somebody you want to keep around, right? No problem. So because he was so good, his supervisor said, hey, I'm going to have you train this other person and listen in on some of their calls and take care of their stuff. So he was training this other person and was still able to maintain 40 to 41 calls a day, and he still had the high excellence rating, and he was training this other person who was actually doing reasonably well. Well, because of that, his supervisor decided to give him another person. Well, after 3 days of that, or a week, I think it was a week, because that's when he was getting measured. Like I said, the story, you get the gist of the story. If I don't get the facts correctly right, it's okay. Anyway, he came to the end of the week and his call volume had dropped to 38 out of 40. Still at 100% satisfaction rating. And his supervisor said, well, I have to write you up because you're not meeting the standard. He says, well, I'm training 2 people. Take one of the people away and I'll go back up to doing 40 and 41 like I'm supposed to. Supervisor said, no, we were really trying to test your ability to train people. So clearly you can't do that and maintain your call volume, so you're getting written up for unacceptable performance. So that pretty much made him really annoyed. Next week comes along, and he's on the call with somebody that just come out of training, one of the guys that he was training. And they had a question about, and to be honest, I don't know what the call center covers. So they had a question about some procedural issue with the customer service plan that they had to follow. And the trainee said, here's the answer that I got from the book. And the guy doing the training said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. I think this is incorrect. Let me check. So he gets on the messaging thing, whatever they're using, their internal messaging, and says, hey, what's the policy? Supervisor says, I don't know. We'll ask the next hired person. Next hired person says, here's what I think, but let me check. Go to the third hired person. Third hired person says, yep, what that person read in the book is absolutely correct. That's the answer to give the client. Go. So the guy says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Now, fortunately, he saved that whole text chain. Well, turns out, a couple days later, customer or client, whatever, calls back in and says, hey, this thing you told me was incorrect. And so supervisor calls him into the office and says, I'm writing you up and you're getting a fail on this call and you're doing this because you gave them the wrong information. He said, what do you mean? Here's what I thought was right. And I said, well, you should have said that. He said, I messaged you and you messaged your boss and they messaged their boss. And they said, here's what I'm supposed to say. So I said that. I said, well, yeah, but you're the one that said it. So you're getting written up. He says, well, what about the bosses? He says, this is not your job to question the bosses. You're supposed to make your calls. So he's now looking for another job. Okay, so what are some of the lessons that we can learn from that? First of all, let's do the recommendations if you were a leader. If you're giving if you're giving somebody who's your best person extra work and they're meeting that extra work, and even after having 2 other people, which is not their job, they're still doing pretty close to the standard, and you have to write them up because they're not meeting the standard, what would a leader do? A leader would say, look, we got to change the policy because this is our best person, highest quality. Training 2 people, their call volume requirement should go down. If I've got them, for every person they're training, they should get 2 or 3 or 5 people knocked off, or 5 calls knocked off of their call volume so they can focus on training. That's what a leader would do. The next one is, when that whole thing happened with the policy issue, the rule, if you're a leader, is the second that you say, here's what I want you to do, you now own that. You own that now. So them all doing their checks and saying, say it, and then it was wrong and writing that person up, catastrophic, cataclysmic failure. Absolutely not the right answer. The way that you should work it is just like I said. Once you take that decision, it's yours now. You just took the buck, and the buck stops with you. And so the person that should have been in trouble was the person 2 levels up that said, that's correct. Because let's be honest, the person that was 2 levels up probably never worked in the call center, probably hadn't read the manual, was probably doing what was off of what they remember or what they thought they heard or what they thought they saw. Who knows when the last time they actually were doing calls? Because you know how these things work. So that's the recommendations for that situation. And the other thing is, now they're getting ready because they made such stupid decisions and because they're having a generic policy that has no flexibility in it, they're about ready to lose their best employee, or one of their best, because he's doing all this great work. So they wonder why their turnover is so high. Well, that's exactly why. Because you treat people like garbage, and if they're working really hard, and then you treat them like more garbage, and they're giving their best, I mean, clearly, you're going to lose them. So let's go through the character traits. Humility. Well, no humility on anybody in charge, right? Because something I forgot to mention, and I think I'm going to have to do not an adjustment, but it's just something to talk about going forward. The character traits that I talk about that all great leaders have had throughout history is how they behave in the organization. So the humility, integrity, empathy, and vigilance is how they were when they were in charge. Because there's lots of people, and I've got lots of videos coming up on those, where the person, when they were in charge of a group, were great people. Get them by themselves, they were kind of doing some questionable stuff. But once they were in charge, spot on. So any humility? No, because humility would be, hey, we're wrong, it's our thing. Any integrity? No integrity. Any empathy? Yeah, there's zero empathy. We're giving you extra work and not changing anything for it. So when we make you work so hard that you fail, that's no empathy. And then vigilance. They weren't paying attention. They weren't looking. They weren't saying, hey, we have to adjust. Because what's the talent? Attune the competence and the environment in pursuit of the goal. So you had the competent. You need to change the environment because the person wasn't quite meeting their goals, but they're also making these 2 people better. So the volume of these 2 people he was training was going up and still quality, which means that the overall net production of this person was higher. That's vigilance. You got to think about these things. So I made this cute little chart, and I hope you can see it. So here's the chart. Hope you can read it. This is a test of this. If it stinks, we'll do something better. But there's barely noticed, loved, feared, and despised. Well, call center gets a despised. So that's the grade for that one. Anyway, as I've always said, I hope you enjoy these little episodes, and we're using the universal standard, what I think is the universal standard, to grade people. If you have a story you'd like to share, my emails in the show description. And I do take them seriously. I had somebody ask a question in one of my videos, and I've thought about it a lot. I'm going to do a response to that next week. But other than that, I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.